We got a little.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Failure will be the topic that we're talking about on the podcast today. Welcome to the hockey edition of Agree or Disagree, the podcast. My name is Kevin Olenek. I'm feeling like I'm eating olives right now. I'm not going to lie. But we have followed me on Twitter at KVOLE. Subscribe to all podcasts on iTunes and Spotify. Add me as a friend on Facebook. Like Agree or Disagree the podcast on Facebook as well. And we are. I am in debrief mode, and joining me as always is Sean. Well, as always is Sean in Calgary. Sean Holmes-Smith, Beardy Canuck. Are you feeling a sense of gloat, or are you feeling a sense of how are you feeling right now?
I was very tentative to pick the Flames in my bracket and in the playoffs to begin with because I was afraid of this with their issues with not being a fast enough team. But I wouldn't say gloat because it's just. It's tough because I was thinking about this earlier. I've got friends in the service industry here in Calgary, and when playoffs come around for a Canadian hockey team, that is huge for that industry. So as a Canucks fan, yes, there is a bit of gloat in it, but as a overall, I would say it's a little disappointing to see them go out so quickly.
Yeah. And joining as well, joined for all of the recaps for the 5 games, Matt Dubourg from the Fireside Podcast. After nights of sleep and feeding cats, how are you feeling?
Oh, about the same. Still disappointed and pissed off at the team, but, it is what it is, and not much you can do.
Well, there we go. We kind of got into this a little bit here. We haven't really heard from Sean, so I want to hear from Sean first, kind of in terms of the overall series. From your perspective, what happened?
Nathan MacKinnon happened. Speed happened. The Flames weren't fast enough. They weren't able to control the speed attack of the Colorado Avalanche. The defense wasn't fast enough at processing the game to break out against the Colorado Avalanche's forecheck, and they weren't able to stop the speed and the rush attack of the Avalanche. And as the series wore on, they got less and less confidence, and the Avalanche players got more and more confidence. You saw that as the last couple games where the Avalanche were making these very confident back passes and that extra pass to create a better scoring opportunity, while the Flames were just very hesitant to do that and were more just getting a shot on net or dumping and chasing.
Matt, what do you think?
Well, you can even see that in the last game with the Gaudreau penalty shot. Like, if Gaudreau's confident, he just streaks in there, blazes in, takes a shot, and scores. But instead, he's very tentative, coming in slow, trying to do the perfect thing, and then eats all of his own space, so that way he can't actually do anything and has a very bad attempt. And that was like the microcosm of the series. The Flames, I feel, beat themselves as much as the Avalanche beat them. And I think that they just got in their own heads and, like, we can't beat these guys at all. And, there was too much hesitation on every play, period, whether it was in the defensive zone or the offensive zone. And where if they were playing like they normally do, those passes would be flowing. they'd be cycling properly and all of that, but they just got overwhelmed and couldn't calm themselves down.
To me, there's a few things here, and we have been pretty. We'll get into the deep criticalness of the players here, and we'll talk a little bit in deep dive of the Colorado Avalanche in a second here too. But I do think, you know what, I really do like Bill Peters. I think going forward, Bill Peters is going to be a good coach for this team. I think he's got the right attitude. I think he's got the right presence. I think he's got the right mindset. But Sean and I were talking about this off air here. I think it's fair to say that he got flatly outcoached in this series. I think it was a monumental error that he did not scratch James Neal, at least in Game 3. You could have argued Game 2 and put in Austin Czarnik. I'm not saying Austin Czarnik is a dynamic player that would have changed the series, but his speed would have helped a lot more than and the way that he used him. I think that there was a tremendous. I don't understand how TJ Brody was playing. I even tweeted this out. I don't understand why TJ Brody was playing more minutes than Rasmus Andersson. That to me was completely confusing. And yes, Hamonic and Hanifin were an utter disaster here, but like the other pairs in this, Brody and Giordano were not a solution. What were your thoughts on the coaching? Talk about the coaching here and maybe kind of pick up on that, because I do think there was some monumental errors I noticed myself. But
yeah, with Bill Peters, I've got I follow a few people on Twitter that follow the Carolina Hurricanes pretty closely. Corey Schneider is one. He does a lot of data analysis of the Hurricanes, and this series basically was a microcosm of his time down in Carolina. Just getting shots for the sake of getting shots and not getting proper scoring chances, and then just giving up too many good opportunities at the other end. And then, as I was saying offline, I thought that Bednar was able to get the matchups he wanted. Well, Bill Peters was not. He as you said, that Hanifin-Homonic pairing just got beat up and was always penned in and giving up shots more than they were doing anything else for the Flames. So it's just it does look like it's a bit of a learning experience for Bill Peters. This is his first playoffs as a head coach, and he's got to take this and learn from it. I was listening to Vancouver radio when they had someone on from Columbus, and they talked about when John Tortorella was let go from the Canucks. Him and Mike Sullivan went through and looked at how all the goals were scored in the NHL, and both of them went from there and designed new systems to create scoring chances, not just shots. And I think that is the next level that Bill Peters needs to take for the Flames to become more than just a regular season hockey team.
And I think that when the Flames are playing their game their way, that we see that. Like in the regular season, like the Flames weren't necessarily the top Corsi team, but they were generating a lot of high danger chances. And like if you look at the Flames highlights, a lot of them are highlight reel goals. It's just that when the playoffs happen, you have less time and space to do all those fancy things, and the Flames need to figure out a way of being able to do what they need to do with that less time and space. And I think that that's where the Flames weren't prepared at all in the offensive zone, was that they just didn't expect to be not respected enough to have that time and space. And as for Bill Peters, I think he's a good coach. He has the right demeanor. It's just hopefully... What I'm hopeful for is that this series pissed the Flames off to be better and to learn from these mistakes. And like you can blame the defense pairings for everything, but the forwards were just as bad. And like when you're getting no help at all it's hard to isolate any one player and say, "Oh, it's all your fault."
Oh yeah, no, I don't think that's what we're saying. I think what the problem was is that a couple of adjustments here and there may have made things a little bit easier.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying that it was all Hamonic and Hanover's fault, because it really wasn't. But I think that there was a lot of things that happened here. Mr. Monahan. I saw someone on Twitter make it like someone is tweeting a poll what we would get for Sean Monahan in a trade, but to me, I've come to the conclusion he's not a number one center. The problem there though is poor Johnny Gaudreau played his heart out last night. I mean, as critical as everyone has been about Johnny Gaudreau, last night I felt there was a bit of an evolution in Johnny Gaudreau, I thought, last night. Yeah, frustrating penalty shot. Yeah, missed an end on a breakaway. But he was trying. This guy put in an effort. I do think that that's something to build on. But part of the problem is Sean Monahan, for whatever reason, whether this is effort, this is injury, or this is brains, he was nowhere to be found in this series. And probably the most telling story of Sean Monahan's playoff was when Tyson Barrie was all over Johnny Gaudreau in the scrum behind the net, and I think it was in the second period. Sean Monahan is just there putting his hand out like it's like, oh, hi, excuse me, can you, Tyson, can you leave him alone, please? Tyson, and just not actually getting in there. And later and this was another telling point of this is when Nathan MacKinnon in the third period, and it was a dirty play, I'm not saying it wasn't, but he basically elbowed and flattened Garnet Hathaway in off the ice, basically. And it's just, I think, the difference about just finding a way to create room for yourself in the playoffs when there is no room. I feel like Sean Monahan, I don't know if Sean Monahan has the ability to do that at a high level.
Yeah, I would say Johnny Gaudreau definitely tried to do that. There's only so much you can do when you're that size without getting out the nasty stick work. But yeah, I would say that you need to get a little nasty. You need to get a little dirty in the playoffs to create space for yourself if you're a star. As a Canucks fan, I go back to 1994 and that absolutely just probably season suspension elbow that Pavel Bure laid out on I can't remember versus St. Louis. Like, if you go back and watch that and you think of what the Department of Player Safety would have done to him at this time, that's an end of playoffs, probably few games into the next season suspension. But at the time, that's what needed to be done to create space for himself. But you need to do a little bit of that to create that space if you're a star player, because in the NHL, in the playoffs, as you said, the time and space gets taken away. And if you can't find that time and space, you're not going to be able to score. So you got to do it with either speed or dirtiness. And that's just the way it is.
And that's part of the problem systemically for the Flames, is that they're built in a very gentlemanly way. And they're very passive generally. Like, they have a couple of guys that are disturbers like a Chuck, but primarily they're all decent players where, like, they don't have that in them to go and throw those dirty hits or anything, really. And that's part of the reason why the Flames kind of got walked all over.
And people used to get frustrated, or people got a little bit laughed at, but you mean Sidney Crosby had to kind of learn that as well. He had to, kind of get into a couple of fights and not allow himself to get abused as he was at the early part of his career. The later part of his career, it's certainly he finds way to create some room. I mean, he's changed his game, and that's a whole other different story. And maybe there's something there to learn, but that's part of the problem. And the other part of that problem is I don't think that the Flames have another centerman that can truly play with Gaudreau. Backlund we talked about as a third center. Derek Ryan is a wonderful add, but he's not a guy that I would be playing with Johnny Gaudreau. And I don't know if we know what, Sean, there's always this mystery about who's Jake Vertanen, and I think that there's a mystery of who Mark Jankowski is. I don't know if he's truly, what is this guy? He was a guy that scored a bunch of shorthanded goals. He can skate, but I don't see him as a top six forward yet.
I don't see him as a top six forward at all. I think, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You need players like Mark Jankowski on your team and in your bottom six. He's got the speed to be an effective third line, fourth line player. And I think that's what they need to just accept the fact out of him. That's what he is. And there's nothing wrong with it. But as you said, the issue is not Jankowski. The issue isn't Backlund. The issue is Sean Monahan, and if he has another gear to actually be able to play at the speed that is needed to play with Johnny Gaudreau in the playoffs and on the rush. Because when you take away the time and space, he disappears.
Matt?
Yeah, and that's where, on our review last night, I was saying that the Flames need to get another decent quality top six center this offseason, just so that way you have another option in case Monahan plays like this, that you can swap the new guy in with Gaudreau and hopefully that be effective, because Monahan at times just vanishes, and and I still believe he's injured, but you can't be having your season relying on a guy who can get hurt at any minute.
He could be, but I don't understand why he's playing. I'm not like, this was since the All-Star break, so if he's been playing with this injury, I'm confused by that. And we've already had that discussion. But we haven't really talked about Elias Lindholm. Because the guy scored his first goal this is the number one right winger on the Calgary Flames, scored his first goal in Game 4 since February 26th, which was a month and a half. I know that he got off to a great start. I know I do think he brings a lot to the table, but I think there's a lot of skill there, but there seemed to be something certainly missing in the second half of the year.
Yeah, and he went through the same spell in Carolina where, the last half of the season, I think he only had one goal. And that it was basically him and Ferland had the same year, basically, with the Flames when Ferland struggled right before he was traded. And both players just vanished in the second half of the season, and Lindholm did the same this year. And why that happened, who knows, but hopefully he can figure out some consistency moving forward. I still don't view him as a top line right winger, even though he had such a great year. Just because of the fact that you need some consistency in your output, and he just vanished after the All-Star break.
Yeah, 6 points in March and April. Not good enough, but I think, again, that just comes down to I think they need to reassess how they look at the lineup and getting some speed into that top six. Because I think that top six plays fast enough. Because the more I've watched the playoffs, the more I've realized that you need to play a fast north-south game to be successful in the NHL playoffs. And you can be successful in the NHL regular season playing that style too. So last night, Elliot Friedman says you need two teams to win in this NHL, one for the regular season and one for the playoffs. I disagree. You just need to look at what makes teams successful in the playoffs, and just extrapolate that to building a fast north-south team. And to me, it's just that it's really evident. And despite the fact that people keep saying big and heavy, no, it's fast and strong.
I agree.
So looking that way, if you're the Flames, what are kind of you're thinking that your priorities are in the offseason of targets?
For me, it's a top 6 center and a top 6 right winger. I think, and a goaltender other than Mike Smith. Beyond that, defense, they're good. The bottom 6 is more or less good. I'm not sure whether or not I would exercise a buyout of James Neal, and if it was attitude, I think that you just buy him outright and say whoops and eat the $2 million cap hit for the next 8 years. But yeah, I think that's basically it.
What do you think, Sean?
I would say, he needs to get faster in the top 6. Doesn't necessarily need to be a center, but you need more speed. And then I think you need to find a way to move out one of your defensemen to give more significant time to the young guys, the Valimakis, the Andersons, the Shillingtons. I think those guys are the next step for the Flames in terms of defense, because they think the game at the speed that you need to think at now.
For me, it's a top. I would even go further and say I think top 3 forwards. We'll get into it. I'll ask about Stone in a second here, but I do think a top 3 forward. I think a right shot defenseman, I think is necessary. I'm open to the idea of bringing Mike Smith back, but I do believe that someone's going to overpay. And if someone overpays and does a 2-year ridiculous contract, I'm okay with him leaving, but I don't. I do think that would have to. I'm not convinced David Rittich is a number 1 goaltender. I know that he's loved by the fan base, but I'm not convinced yet that this guy is shown to be a number 1 goaltender. There were times this year that David Rittich allowed some really bad goals, and Flames fans ignored that and got really upset when Mike Smith allowed bad goals. But I'm not convinced Rittich is a number 1 goaltender yet. Myself.
I view his season a lot like Chad Johnson's when he was here. Very good at the beginning and then just okay the rest of the way. And Rittich had a very good first couple of months, and once the calendar switched over to 2019, I thought he was quite mediocre.
Yeah.
With goaltenders, you need to give them that time to learn how to play tired and play more than 30, 40 games. And that's the next step for David Rittich if he's going to be a number 1 goaltender. And there's only one way to get that, and that's to try it.
That's true. I mean, you don't need to get a number 1. You can start with Rittich and see where that goes. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily an absolute priority. Although Matt and I discussed the idea last night of Devin opening the Jason Zucker move that was rumored to be completed in the at the trade deadline, and seeing if the option of a Devin Dubnyk can come back the other way.
Yeah, I don't think they necessarily. For me, I don't think the Flames necessarily need to bring in a quote-unquote true number 1. I think you need to give Rittich the opportunity to play more, because I think he's got the ability to be a number 1. But the other thing is you need to be patient, and you need to bring in someone who can play 30, 35 games and make Rittich the 1A.
Yeah.
You look at Connor Hellebuyck and Jacob Markstrom as 2 examples of goaltenders who came in, were given the opportunity to be the number 1. They struggled in their first season of doing that. and then came back stronger and looked like good number one starters in the second one. So I think the Flames need to have a little bit of patience with David Rittich and give him more leash next year and let him grow into that.
Interesting. And so 2 more quick things here. Since I have both of you here, we have a Canucks perspective, we have a Flames perspective, and there's always a fascination of Matthew Tkachuk. And, the Canuck fan base does not love Matthew Tkachuk. The Flame fan base absolutely loves Matthew Tkachuk. How effective was he in this series? What do you see going forward? Was it help or hindrance? I'll let you guys kind of talk that out.
I don't think Tkachuk played his game.
No, he didn't.
He wasn't the Rat King that he was in the regular season.
Yeah,
that was one of the best shirts I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, where is that sold? So that way, because that was awesome. But yeah, no, Tkachuk, he just didn't play like most of the players on the Flames. They just didn't play their game at all. And Brad Marchand, he needs to play like that in the postseason to be effective, and you just didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
The reason the Canucks fans hate Tkachuk is that he is a pain in the ass to play against. He just is constantly in your face, in your grill, making you work a little extra after that whistle. And he did not do that this series.
Yeah, and like Flames fans definitely know that feeling with some of the former Canucks like Bieksa, Kessler, Ruutu, Cook. So we know what that's like on our end. So it's the same type of frustration, and we just didn't see that from Chucky this time. And actually, like in the last couple weeks of the season, he didn't really play like himself either. So again, like Monahan, I'm wondering if there might be an injury there or something. But it's just one of those things, like when players just randomly disappear, you always have that in the back of your head, like maybe this guy's playing through an injury or something, because it just doesn't make sense when they just completely stop playing their game.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, I think, in terms of why there was such a drastic thing. But maybe, I think what Darren Haynes pointed out as well is in his article is Colorado actually had a better record in the second half than the Flames, and maybe we completely underestimated this. I mean, I know as a Flames fan, I thought that Colorado would have been a better matchup than Dallas. I'm not. Maybe Dallas would have beat Calgary too. Maybe you never know. Probably, who knows?
Well, with how Calgary played, I think that it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
The only team I think that they might have been able to beat is Arizona.
Yeah,
but even then, that would have been iffy.
Yeah,
with how they played.
But Colorado, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them going forward, because I do think that the one thing that they do have as an advantage, I think McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen, however you play Mikko Rantanen, you play him with McKinnon or not, I think matches up very well with the Vegas forward group. I think JT Compher is going to cause some. I'm assuming Vegas beat San Jose. Vegas, San Jose, whatever. And I think their defense and their depth was a little bit underrated going into this series, which I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Vegas against Vegas and San Jose going forward.
Honestly, I think that if they play Vegas, that series is over in 5 games or less. I don't see Colorado beating Vegas at all, or even
a tough run. I think the one thing that Colorado has is the speed to match up to to Vegas, and I think they have a smarter defense in terms of puck movement than a more efficient defense in terms of puck movement than San Jose. that will be able to get out of trouble quicker from the Vegas forecheck, which is their biggest strength. I think having you look at their pairings. You've got Ian Cole and Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson may not be your typical puck moving defense, but he's an efficient one. You've got Tyson Barrie on the next pairing, where he's a really good passer and puck mover. And then how Cale Makar played this series was just fantastic. Like the confidence he played with and willing to jump up into the play and make smart passes for the breakout just was really, really impressive. And I think going into Vegas or San Jose, I think he could be the X factor for Colorado going forwards.
Matt, do you have a response?
No, I agree with a lot of what was said. So
okay. Yeah,
I just think like on the overall that Vegas as a team is better like in each area, and I think that's why that they'll handle them easily.
One more thing, I did want to get back to the Flames here for a minute. To get back to the trade deadline, just the one quick thing is bowing out of the Mark Stone sweepstakes. Not making that big, high-impact top six forward. Looking back, was that? I mean, I guess in hindsight, being 2020, are you still okay that they didn't make that move?
Entirely, yes.
Okay.
I'm perfectly happy that they didn't. I think Valimaki is going to be a top pairing defenseman, and having Valimaki for the next 8-10 years versus Stone, I think is more important, and I think that there are other ways that you can go and get a similar-ish forward to Stone without having to surrender a top-pairing defenseman to be.
Sean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this wasn't the year. As much as there's times where you think with the Flames, when they're two of the most important players they've had either in the regular season or in this series was a 35-year-old defenseman in Gio and a 37-year-old goalie in Mike Smith. I think this is a building year for the Flames. Their blue line is their strength with Valimaki, Anderson, and Shillington all very young and looking very good.
Even adding Hannafin, because he's actually younger than Anderson. So
yeah.
So the Flames have 4 good young defensemen that should be anchors of the team for the next 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years.
And then you've got, and then it's just, like I said, find some speed in that top 6 to change the game, because right now they're too slow there. And if they can do that, then they can build on this season. Right. I don't think we're going to win the West next year. I think there's a lot better teams in the West, and I think everything just fell very, very perfectly for the Flames to do that. But I think they're going to be a very strong team going forwards for the next few years.
Well, it's one of those things, and as we transition to the other team that had a monumental meltdown here, it's sometimes winning a bunch of, you could lose more games next year and actually turn out to be a better team. You can end up being.
Look at Detroit in 95-96. They set the record for most points, I think, in the regular season, and lost in the conference finals. Made a couple of trades to shake things up a bit. Ended up only winning 38 games, but then won the Stanley Cup in back-to-back years.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, it's not how you start; it's how you finish. Ask Columbus and Tampa, right? As Columbus as everyone predicted, right? Columbus would sweep the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, I have that completely figured out, right?
Yeah, exactly. I predicted a sweep in that series.
Yeah, everyone predicted a sweep. It was just the other way. What happened there?
I think that they just kind of got a little too full of themselves, and I think that was the same syndrome that the Flames fell into, of we're just awesome, so bow down and lick our boots. And the other team's like, no, we're here to play hockey, and neither Tampa or Calgary had a response. They just thought that they were clearly better than everybody else and didn't put the effort in.
Yeah, I think it was, again, just to think John Tortorella putting in and implementing a system that was more north-south than east-west. The Columbus Blue Jackets team finally sort of found the cohesion that they needed and the chemistry that they needed after all the moves they made at the trade deadline. And just after they came back from that 3-0 deficit in game one and won it, they just had a belief, and they had that little extra drive and determination to make sure that their system was the one that was being dictated in the games.
Yeah. They, for an 8th seed, they actually, we talked a little bit about this with Mitch last week. They actually are kind of, they're sort of a fake 8th seed in the sense that they only finished 2 points behind Toronto. People forget that. I mean, they were in a tougher division, and probably better than we wanted to admit. And I think maybe we were just enamored also with Tampa. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the turning points in this series were actually quite similar in so many ways, is because Columbus came back from a 3-0 deficit. Colorado was able to come back from the 2-1 deficit in game 2, and Comfort was able to score with 2.5 minutes left. And McKinnon wins that game in overtime, and I think it builds, like those types of wins, builds belief and erodes confidence in the other team. And that ultimately is why Columbus is going on, and Colorado is going on, and Tampa and Calgary are golfing.
Yeah, and trying left to pick up all the pieces and figure out what the heck happened.
Yeah. So if you're Tampa, how do you approach this offseason? You won 62 games. You were miles ahead of everybody else in the regular season. You don't have a heck of a lot of weaknesses perceived. What do you do?
Not a lot. Tinker around the edges.
The one issue is that they don't have a lot of cap space, and they have Braden Point to sign, and he's going to get $8-9 million a year.
Yeah.
So I think you need to just move forward. Hold on one second.
Sure. Oh, hello, doggies. Is that a dog? Well, an animal of some kind. Yeah. Yeah. To me, Braden. If Braden Point was playing in a place like Toronto, Matt, I think a lot of people would be learning a lot more about him. But he is a top-notch guy that teams would pay a lot for, and that's going to be a really interesting point.
Yeah.
What they do there.
Yeah, and that's why, I think they just have to tweak around the edges. I don't think they need to do anything drastic, like shipping off one of their key guys for something else or anything like that. They were a team that had very few weaknesses, and I think that they just were a little overconfident. Stamkos, prior to the playoffs, was talking about how it sucks that they'd have to face Boston in the second round, and they just looked past Columbus entirely. And I think that for both Calgary and Tampa Bay, you're looking at teams that are going to be a lot more prepared for the playoffs starting next season. And I think that they'll be a lot more determined to not be embarrassed like that again.
Yeah. If I'm Tampa, there's a couple of players that I would consider bringing in. One is a guy like Justin Williams, who has Cup experience behind him. I think would be a difference. And even a guy that is, that Vancouver maybe overpaid for Sean, but a guy like Jay Beagle may not be a bad guy to have in Tampa Bay. If I was Tampa Bay, I would at least make a phone call for a Jay Beagle and see what happens there. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. He's really loved out. His contract is really loved out here, I know, but
The issue with the Lightning again is cap space.
Yeah.
They're going to have to move a few guys out if they're going to bring in players like that.
Yeah.
So, but Ryan Callahan with one season left at a decent cap hit, and then they're probably still have to move out one or two other players to get the cap space they need to make the moves. Though.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my point is getting that kind of that winning Stanley Cup ring experience. I think getting that kind of the people in there, which you don't necessarily need to do in the off season. That can be something that you can tinker with. I do agree that they don't need to do. I mean, they need to figure out the cap space part of it, but in terms of like making a massive shift, I don't see it yet. But I don't know if you missed this, Sean, but if Braden Point was playing in Canada, there would be conversations about 4 first-round picks for Braden Point, and if that would be worth it, because he is that good of a player, for sure, which is going to be really interesting to figure out how to sign him.
Yeah.
But, and the other sweep that happened was the Pittsburgh Penguins, which I had the Penguins winning. My bracket.
So did
I. What happened here? What has happened to the Pittsburgh Penguins? Are they?
They're on the downswing like Chicago. I think this is their last run as a contender at all, and I think they're just going to slowly ease off into the sunset. I think that it's basically it for them in this iteration.
I think they'll have to they'll give it one more shot. I think next year with the current core, but I think they will have to make some major moves and start retooling and building around Crosby in a different way. Maybe without Malkin or without Letang type deal to really change up how they can approach the building of the team, because I think it's time to look at it differently.
So we're assuming Crosby staying. I think that's 99.9% certain. I mean, even Gretzky was trading, but we're assuming Crosby staying. What would if you're the? I mean, this is kind of maybe fantasy, but possibly realistic. What would be a reasonable expectation to get Malkin? Like if.
I think the equivalent of like 2 first-round picks and a couple of good young players.
I think you could get a couple good first-round picks and a couple young sort of A/B prospects for a team that needs to take that next big step.
Any early bets on who might take a shot at them?
I would say like that's the team that's going to be looking to add that game changing player, because they don't have that piece in their top 6 right now, and the owner's getting a little impatient.
Matt, any names?
Not really that I can think of off the top of my head. I think a lot of teams. There's not really too many teams where it wouldn't make sense.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's one of those where you just kind of like, oh, he got traded to, say, San Jose. Okay, that makes sense. Or LA, or, like a whole bunch of different places. Yeah. Like, it would make sense for a whole bunch of different teams. So it just depends on who and what.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so the next topic I want to get into is the greatest mystery in the National Hockey League. It's a mystery that happens every game. It looks so obvious to us on TV or watching at the hockey game. It looks so often to broadcasters, but yet when we go to the video situation room, it is complete confusion. What is goaltender interference?
That is something that they have to figure out, because Like, I watched that goal that was waved off yesterday by Gaudreau, and you have the Colorado player grabbing Bennett and pulling him into himself and the goalie, and yet it gets called off, which, like, I can understand that there was contact and all of that, but, like, there's no clear-cut rules on, like, if you hit your own guy and you're pulling the instigator of the contact into you, like, it's just weird. And, like, it's basically on anything where the goalie's touched at all. It's like, well, we'll see, because, you think that on certain plays, like, I know Tkachuk had a goal earlier this year that was waved off because the goalie put his stick into his arm and wrenched it free and couldn't reset in time. And, like, Tkachuk was just standing there, and he didn't grab the stick or anything. He was literally just standing there, and the goalie screwed up, and yet the goal was called back. And you're like, well, what's to prevent the goalie from just interfering with anybody, and then, oh, well, that goal's getting called back? Like, there's so many weird calls this year that, like, there's no clear cut, X, Y, or Z. Like, say what you will about, like, the foot in the crease rule before, like, that was pretty cut and dry. If the foot's in the crease, it's no goal. And where there's no defined parameters at all for this. And I think that's one of the main problems.
Yeah, listening to the discussion that was in the intermission there between on Sportsnet's panel with Ron McLean and company, it was really interesting to listen to. But the one thing I got is basically, unless there's absolute indisputable evidence that the call on the ice is wrong, they're going to stick with the ref's call. And sometimes you don't even know what the ref's call is. Yeah, that was like, in the Toronto game. I'm like, what's the call on the ice? Is it a goal, or was there?
Like, honestly, I think in the playoffs they should make, like, every single goal reviewed, and, like, to be blunt, screw what the refs think entirely, and just make the right call.
But you have to have, I think what Brian Burke and Ron McLean were saying is you have to have a decision on the ice. Like, you can't go to the video situation, and they don't want, what Burke said this too, they don't want to go to the situation room and say, okay, it's your decision. The referee has to make a decision on the call. It's like pass interference in football. You have to make a decision on what the call is, and then the video situation room goes, pardon the pun here, but agree or disagrees with the call, right? That's the problem.
The other problem is that we just don't understand why the call is one way in one instance and another in another, right?
Yeah, because it was virtually the same play in the two games, and yet one was a goal and the other one wasn't. And that's what's so frustrating to most fans. And it's, and like you hear some fans like, oh, the game's fixed and all that kind of stuff. And like, I can understand those type of feelings because of the fact that it is so ambiguous that you just don't know what's being called.
Well, yeah, and it's not just goaltender interference that's the issue. It's the standard of what is and what isn't a penalty in the playoffs changes game to game, ref crew to ref crew.
Look at that Backlund penalty with like 3 minutes left. They'd been letting all that kind of stuff go. Yeah. And then, it's Colorado's down a goal with 3 minutes left. Let's call that. And it's like, you weren't calling that all game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was saying that on last night's game that apparently holding was removed from the rule book for that game.
Yeah.
It was both ways. I remember seeing, like, Johnny was just getting mugged a lot, and then the only reason he got the penalty shot was because he fought through it and got to a breakaway. And then even on the other side, I remember seeing one Colorado Avalanche player just looks like he was about to break free and then almost got yanked backwards. And call. I was just like, I understand that you don't want the refs to quote unquote change the game by calling a penalty, but you got to find a standard, stick to it, be clear about what the standard is to the players, the owners, the coaches, the media, the fans, and again, just stick to it. And that's something that the NHL hasn't been able to do for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you're seeing this in all four of the sports where none of the teams, none of the umpires or referees or that, like you're getting a whole bunch of new people in each of the four sports, and they're not doing anywhere near as good of a job as the older, more experienced guys. And like in baseball, like there's a couple of umpires that are just so bad that it's like, what, like get robot umpires. Like that's how bad. And like it's that bad. And but we're seeing that in all four of the sports. And I think that hopefully this group of referees sticks for a long time and learns how to properly manage games. Because, like, you look back in the past, like, when Mick Magoo was reffing, you knew what you were going to get. When Kerry Fraser was reffing, you knew what you were going to get. And with a whole bunch of these guys, it's like, okay, sure, that's a penalty, or that's not a penalty, whatever, and you just don't know.
I know Tyler. If Tyler was here, he would talk about the intricacies and the complications of working a two-man system.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That plays into it. But again, it's just one thing I would love to see the NHL and the NHL refs do is put a video out and say, this is why we call this is why we call that, and then
and have Wes McCauley say you can't do that.
Yeah.
Or talk about his ice cream love.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the NFL Network does that, right? The NFL Network, and even the NFL games. I one of the things that they have done is brought in an official analyst to say this is what that's going to be, and maybe this is something the NHL broadcasting networks, our friends at Sportsnet and NBC, do as well, is bring in a referee as part of, like, this is what they are thinking, because I think part of the problem here is communication, right? So when a Gene Steratore says something at the Super Bowl of why this is being called or not, I think that there's some clarity from a fan base. But we don't have that in the NHL. We don't have that communication from the referee, which I think I think that they need to improve on.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago they sort of did a video on why certain instances were supplementary disciplines and some weren't. I think they need to do that with reffing, with tripping, hooking, holding calls, like all that, as well as I think they need to take a page out of the NBA's book and not necessarily have the refs talk after the game, but have some sort of media release where you can go over some controversial calls and figure out and explain why they were called a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, it's the communication part, and they have the way to do this in social media. Like the CFL, God love them for, there's a lot of issues in the CFL, but one of the things that they do very well is they will tweet out why the ruling was what it was, and you can analyze that for whatever it was. I think the NHL is behind, it's certainly behind the NFL and the NBA and the other major sports in that sort of communication that is missing there. But in my mind, is there anything else we want to touch on that I missed that we did not get to?
No, I think we got a good this week. And we're going to hopefully see some good games today and tomorrow, and should see the start of the second round come next weekend.
Yes. By God, can you imagine that it's quite possibly the only Canadian team left is the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, weren't they the Canadian team in the first place?
Oh, yes, of course. That's
That being said, if that's the case, I may be cheering for them in the second round only because I want to see a Toronto-New York Islanders conference final.
Same here.
That would be
just
so
awesome.
Yeah, that would be so good.
The Pajama Boy Bull.
Like every game 3, 4, or every game that is in Toronto would be John Tavares Day.
I think every game would be Sean Tavares Day, just in a positive and negative light.
Yeah. I also think that they should, if that happens, I actually think that they should change the rule there, and instead of jerseys, they wear pajamas.
Yeah.
I think that that's only fair. You know. Matt, what do you guys got going on the Fireside Podcast coming up?
We're going to be doing our recap tomorrow or the next day. That probably won't get published until Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. And we'll just be breaking down our thoughts on the season, all of the, like, what we would expect the team to do on all that kind of stuff moving forward, potential solutions, yada, 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 all that kind of stuff. We're also, in a couple weeks, probably more towards June, we'll be doing some draft preview stuff, covering the entry draft, reactions to any trades or moves that are made. And then in early July, we'll be at the development camp covering whomever the Flames prospects are and going from there, and then having a nice summer off and hopefully a better season next year.
Yeah. Sean, what do we got going on? You're bringing in some guests, and I can't remember the names of them. There's Cam Robinson.
We're working on finding a bunch of draft experts. I've been in contact with Ryan Beach of Canucks Army, Cam Robinson of Dauber Hockey, and then we will be having Derek Niemeyer on from Future Considerations and the Dallas blog from the Face Off, Daily Face Off, and all that group of team blogs to talk about the NHL draft and going forwards with younger players.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and especially I think as going forward here, I think if the Vancouver Canucks, so the Vancouver Giants getting the Memorial Cup, I think the story of Bo and Byram will become a lot stronger too. So that absolutely will be needed to examine that as well. But thanks guys again for coming on. Thanks Matt again for your time through the 5 games.
No worries.
Great. And thanks Sean again, and thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.